This is Street Politics Report, where we break down the headlines nobody wants to read and the realities too dark for the mainstream. What happens when gang power mixes with social media, broken systems, and unchecked exploitation? You get one of the most disturbing federal cases South Central has seen in years, and it's still unfolding as we speak. In August 2025, federal agents launched a coordinated takedown targeting a set affiliated with the Hoover criminal network. The charges? Human trafficking, gang enhancement, conspiracy, and RICO. But this wasn't just another gang sweep. This time, the alleged enterprise was led by a woman, Lady Duck, and her second-in-command, a digital enforcer known as P4K. Together, prosecutors say they ran a sex-trafficking ring that stretched from South Central to Long Beach, using hotels, foster kids, and burner phones to feed a dark pipeline that lived on Figueroa Street. This ain't a rumor. This ain't rap lyrics. This is paperwork. This is evidence pulled from phones, DMs, and surveillance that had been running for months. At the center of it all, a set of young girls, some as young as 15, many fresh out the foster system, manipulated into silence and sold like property. Fig, as the streets call it, has long been known as LA's Blade, a strip where exploitation hides in plain sight. But what the FBI uncovered this summer exposed something bigger: an organized criminal structure using gang loyalty and digital finesse to turn trafficking into enterprise. This case isn't just disturbing, it's revealing. Because while the world focused on music, fashion, and West Coast clout, a criminal economy was thriving right underneath it. And when the feds moved in, they didn't just come for the shooters, they came for the recruiters, the bookkeepers, and the digital ghosts running traps through apps. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down what really happened. From the history of Hoover's South Central influence, to how a female-led crew flipped the game with fear, finesse, and finesse. No clickbait, no fantasy, just a breakdown of how trafficking tech and territory turned into federal heat. This is Street Politics Report. And today, we're shining light on one of the darkest cases to come out of LA in 2025. Before we go any further, let's get one thing clear. Everything in this episode is based on real indictments, affidavits, and public information. All individuals mentioned are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This documentary is not made to glorify crime, disrespect victims, or sensationalize tragedy. It's built to explain how it happens, why it matters, and what it says about the system we all live under. This case is heavy. It deals with sex trafficking, gang activity, and the exploitation of minors, especially girls from the foster care system. We say their stories with respect, not judgment. We mention names not to shame, but to document how power, silence, and survival collide in the shadows of a city that too often looks away. This is for the victims who didn't get a headline, for the communities that live under helicopters and never see closure, and for the people trying to make sense of how a culture built on loyalty gets twisted into control. We don't point fingers. We don't play sides. We report what's in the files and what's already playing out in court. Let's get to the facts. South Central ain't just a location. It's a whole legacy, built on survival, scarred by redlining, and reshaped through decades of street politics. And sitting right in the middle of it is Hoover territory, a stretch of LA that's seen every kind of hustle come and go. Dope, guns, fraud, drill rap. But in the last decade, a different kind of economy started taking root on its blocks: human trafficking. And the front line of that business? Figueroa Street. Locals know what it is. Outsiders pretend they don't. From 67th all the way down to Manchester and beyond, it's one of the most infamous sex tracks in the West. On any given night, you'll see girls out in heels, hoodies, or barely anything, some young, some scared, all moving like they're on a clock. That strip ain't lit by dreams, it's lit by trauma. The game changed over the years. What used to be pimps and Cadillacs evolved into encrypted phones and Cash App transactions. Instead of waiting on corners, girls now get booked through Twitter replies and close friends' Instagram stories. And behind those profiles are handlers, men and women, connected to organized street sets using Hoover muscle to control the blade. That's where this case starts to take shape. Hoover Criminals, one of LA's most deeply rooted gang networks, has long been associated with various criminal enterprises. But this new generation? They move different. The indictment lays it out. Figures like Lady Duck and P4K weren't running traditional drug corners. They were allegedly managing an online-to-street trafficking ring using minors, runaways, and overlooked girls from the system, all operating within South Central borders but recruiting far beyond. And they weren't sloppy. Prosecutors say the group used rotating Airbnbs, hotel drop-ins, and burner phones to dodge heat. The girls were moved like product, kept on rotation to avoid suspicion. Some were posted up on Fig. Others were listed online under fake names, listed in cities they weren't even in. And still the money flowed back to the same structure. Allegedly. All of it fueled by poverty, power, and pressure. In a place where opportunity stays locked behind zip codes, the game becomes survival. And when your big homie tells you it's just business, not everyone knows they're the ones getting sold. That's how it plays out on Fig. That's how it moves in South Central. The federal paperwork calls it an enterprise. But on the street, they just called it Hoover business. Not the whole set, but a cell operating inside of it. And it wasn't the structure most people picture when they think of organized crime. This wasn't a man in a suit or a corner boy with a burner. This was a woman. Lady Duck. The indictment lists her as the top-level manager. Street smart, social media savvy, and ruthless in strategy. She wasn't just collecting money. She was allegedly organizing the movement, setting rules, training younger girls how to act, and enforcing silence. A rare female figure in the command chain of a gang-based trafficking operation, something the feds said made the case stand out. Under her was P4K, not just muscle, but the digital brain. He allegedly handled phones, ran the DMs, and tracked girls through location-sharing apps. Prosecutors say he set pricing, filtered messages from potential buyers, and even helped enforce punishment if one of the girls tried to leave or break protocol. It wasn't just a two-person show. This was a pyramid. Below them were stable managers, middlemen and women who controlled 2 to 4 girls each. They handled rides, food, lodging, and collected a cut of the money. Girls were rotated between stables to keep them disoriented and dependent. Many of these managers were younger, some barely out of their teens themselves. Others were ex-victims turned recruiters, repeating the cycle they had once been trapped in. The operation used coded language, dates, check-ins, walk time, phrases that seemed harmless on texts or captions, but in context told a full story. Burner phones were used to communicate, changed every week. When a girl got arrested, another was already lined up to take her place. And the loyalty? It wasn't built on trust. It was built on fear, shame, and silence. Some of the girls were branded, literal tattoos marking them as property. One said ladies' work on the back of her neck. Another had the Hoover star with a $sign inside it. These weren't just gang tags. They were psychological chains. Money moved fast. A single girl could bring in over $1,000 a night. Multiply that across 10 or more girls, and you're looking at revenue close to 6 figures a month, most of it untraceable, hotels paid in cash, food from DoorDash, transportation handled by drop cars. The feds said it was more structured than most small businesses, and they weren't lying. Behind the street presence was a back-end system, safe houses, rotating motel spots, clean phones, even a coded ranking system to determine who got moved where, who was hot, who needed discipline, who could be trusted around Johns with money. All allegedly. But one thing's for sure. This wasn't sloppy gang activity. It was enterprise. And for years it stayed in motion, right under the city's nose. In every trafficking indictment, the paperwork lists victims like line items. But when you look deeper, into the transcripts, affidavits, and raw court statements, a pattern forms. These weren't just exploited girls. They were symbols of a bigger collapse: the foster care system, street loyalty, digital manipulation, and how all of it gets weaponized when predators organize. The Hoover enterprise didn't target women with stability. They went after who the world had already dropped. According to the feds, a majority of the victims were minors, some just 15. Many bounced from group homes, shelters, or abusive placements. That instability made them easy to isolate and even easier to control. Recruitment wasn't aggressive, it was subtle. A DM saying, "You're beautiful," or "You could be making money." Sometimes it came from a fake modeling page, other times it came from another girl already in the life, one who'd been broken just enough to start helping break others. That's part of the cycle. Turn the hurt into recruiters. Once they replied, it escalated. Fast. They'd be invited to link up, offered food, maybe a place to stay. A few hours later, the manipulation would begin. The girls weren't told they were being trafficked. They were told they owed someone. That they were now under protection. That what they did from here on out was for the set. It was psychological conditioning disguised as street structure. The court documents described a tiered model. The girls were ranked, watched, moved between hotel rooms and Airbnbs. Their names changed. Their birth dates were lied about. Some were branded. Tattoos signaling ownership. The trauma wasn't just physical. It was financial, digital, spiritual. And the punishment for disobedience wasn't always violence. Sometimes it was isolation. Other times it was threats to expose them, to their parents, to CPS, to whoever they still trusted. One victim said she was told she'd end up in the desert if she didn't comply. She was 16, and her statement came with visible tremors. Many of the girls were made to choose between sleeping outside or working. That's not a choice. That's coercion wrapped in desperation. The feds also noted how the Hoover crew exploited technology to trap the girls. GPS sharing forced them to keep phones on. Cash App history tracked their income. Their digital presence became part of the leash. Every ping, every post, every blocked number was noted by P4K or someone else in the chain. And when girls tried to leave, they were replaced immediately. There was no shortage of vulnerability in a city like LA. The operation fed off silence. Cops didn't check. Hotels didn't ask. Bystanders didn't intervene. What this structure reveals is something colder than just crime. It's a system of domination designed to operate without conscience, a method to turn trauma into revenue. And the most disturbing part? It worked for years. Not because it was invisible, but because it was normalized. That's what makes the victims in this case different. They weren't just survivors of abuse. They were survivors of a business model, one that ran right through Fig and bled into every system that failed them long before the first DM ever hit. In the old days, the streets talked in whispers. But in 2025, everything lives online. And for the Hoover trafficking ring, that digital trail became both their moneymaker and their downfall. Federal agents had been watching, not just the corners, but the comments. They ran ghost accounts on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, even TikTok. They tracked hashtags like #FigSide, #SlimeWalk, and obscure emojis used as secret advertisements. P4K and others allegedly ran multiple fake pages, booking girls, posting them in lingerie with blurred faces, geotags off. But the clues were there. Some of the girls were listed as 19, but looked 15. The caption said, "DM for availability." The feds weren't just seeing this. They were screenshotting everything. According to the case files, law enforcement used data warrants to obtain message threads from deleted accounts. On several of those threads, Lady Duck's burner numbers showed up, coordinating drop-offs, setting price floors, warning about stings. One of the most disturbing discoveries came from a Telegram group titled Fig Tonight, a private chat where girls were ranked, locations were shared, and buyers traded reviews. The IPs behind the group were traced to hotels in South LA and Airbnbs rented under fake names. several connected to the same prepaid cards used by P4K. Then came the money trail. Cash App, Venmo, Zelle under aliases. Some victims said they were forced to transfer money straight to a list of usernames. The feds subpoenaed those records and started mapping out the digital banking web. Thousands of dollars moving weekly. Most of it split between Lady Duck and two other unindicted co-conspirators still under investigation. But the big break didn't come from a post or a DM. It came from a burner phone dropped during a police stop near Figueroa and 82nd. The phone was unlocked. Inside were GPS pins, photos of girls posing in motels, notes with payment logs, and voice memos from Lady Duck instructing what to do if they get mouthy. That phone was the digital gold mine. Agents cross-referenced names, car descriptions, room numbers, even text phrases. They built timelines from those messages. Who picked up who, where they drove, who got paid, who didn't. What started as screenshots became full digital surveillance. And all this was happening while the ring kept posting like everything was sweet. Girls still going live on Instagram from motel rooms, still flashing money, still dropping thirst traps to get booked by buyers too dumb to know the feds were in the comments. What they didn't know. Half those likes came from federal ghost accounts. Half those views came from task force agents sitting in plain rooms in Van Nuys, just watching and waiting. When the case finally dropped, the paperwork had everything. Burner logs, call recordings, app screenshots, deleted tweets, Cash App handles, and Dropbox folders with videos labeled by date and time. In the digital age, even darkness leaves a footprint. And this crew? They left enough to bury themselves. August 14th, 2025. Before sunrise, unmarked vans moved through South Central like they had a map to every shadow. It was the moment the streets didn't see coming. But the feds had been planning for months. Operation Clean Blade, a multi-agency takedown involving FBI, Homeland Security, LAPD, and the California Department of Justice. The target? The Hoover-linked trafficking structure operating along Figueroa, led by Lady Duck and P4K. At 4:47 a.m., agents breached an Airbnb unit near LAX where Lady Duck had been staying under a fake identity. She didn't go quietly. Inside, they found multiple phones, a ledger notebook with coded transactions, two girls underage but dressed like adults. One of them listed as missing for over 6 months. Simultaneously, another team moved in on a 2-story motel off Fig and 82nd. That's where they got P4K. According to the arrest affidavit, he was mid-transaction, picking up cash from a local buyer when the feds surrounded him. He tried to run through a back gate, but a helicopter was already overhead. On him, 2 phones, a loaded 9mm, and a burner Wi-Fi hotspot. Altogether, 17 locations were hit across South Central, Inglewood, and Long Beach. Over 40 people detained. 12 girls pulled out, 6 of them confirmed minors. 3 more were found in a suspected safe house in Hawthorne, scared, disoriented, and malnourished. One had fresh burns on her inner thigh, allegedly from a branding attempt. That image alone ended up in the FBI's official press file. Inside the safe houses and motels, agents found wigs, lingerie, ledgers, sex toys, prepaid debit cards, and maps with certain hotels circled in red. One whiteboard listed the girls by code names, their weekly goals, and punishments for being off track. That wasn't street slang. That was enterprise language. Hours after the raids, U.S. Attorney Carla Winslow held a press conference. She didn't hold back. This wasn't a few people doing wrong. This was a structured, profit-driven criminal network using underage girls as disposable currency. She confirmed a RICO indictment, 26 counts in total. Charges included sex trafficking of minors, kidnapping, financial crimes, gang enhancement, and conspiracy under federal racketeering law. Lady Duck and P4K were named as primary leaders. Several others were listed as co-conspirators, some with ties to Hoover sets operating across Los Angeles. As the news broke, local media scrambled. Neighbors told reporters they'd seen the traffic, girls coming and going, strange men parked late, but never knew the full story. "I thought it was just drug stuff," one man said. I didn't know there were kids in there. By noon, the Hoover district was locked tight. Streets closed, patrols heavy, and online, the streets were already reacting. Mugshots surfaced. Threads popped up trying to ID more victims. Some shouted "Free Duck," claiming setup. Others said it should have happened years ago. No one was neutral. For the girls pulled out of those rooms, this wasn't freedom, not yet. Some didn't even remember what school they came from. Others asked if they were going to jail. Their understanding of safety had been so flipped, they didn't know who to trust, even in rescue. But for the task force, this was the biggest trafficking bust LA had seen in over a decade. Not just for the number of victims, but for the structure behind it. What they cracked open in August wasn't chaos. It was a cold, calculated business. A blade economy run from Instagram, hotel rooms, and Hoover-controlled corridors. And the only thing more chilling than what they found is how long it had been working. As the indictments hit the news cycle, reactions poured in, fast, divided, and loud. Some saw the Hoover takedown as justice overdue. Others said it was the system reaching too far again, spinning the same RICO strategy used against rappers and now throwing it at street women. But no matter what side people fell on, one thing was clear. This case hit deeper than most. Mainstream media ran with it. CNN and ABC covered it as a major federal bust, highlighting the underage victims and the gang connections. But street blogs, urban YouTube channels, and TikTok investigators added more layers, showing old videos of Lady Duck flexing money, P4K and trap studios, girls walking Fig with Hoover tags in their captions. The narrative split quick. Some voices online tried to paint Lady Duck as a hustler, calling her smart for running a six-figure structure and flipping the game on its head. But survivors and activists weren't buying it. They reminded people that the girls involved weren't free agents. They were manipulated kids, branded, beaten, and sold. "She didn't flip the game," one advocate tweeted. "She just wore a different face while doing the same damage." The community on Fig had mixed feelings. Residents long knew what was happening but said nothing ever stuck. Raids would come, a few arrests, and then it would start again. "This one felt different," said an Inglewood shop owner. "They didn't just hit the foot soldiers, they took out the organizers." Grassroots organizations like Not on My Watch, LA, and Foster Justice Collective held press events, pointing fingers at the foster care system that failed so many of the girls. If a 16-year-old can disappear from a group home and end up on Fig with nobody checking, that's not just a gang problem. That's a system collapse. Debate also sparked over the use of RICO in sex trafficking cases. Legal analysts argued it was a powerful tool, but dangerous if over-applied. The DA's office defended it. If you structure pain for profit, you're a criminal enterprise, period. Among younger voices, the conversation turned to prevention. What does protection look like in a city where predators have Instagram accounts and street rep? Where girls are being offered model contracts through DMs by people with Hoover ties? Even in the music world, tension grew. Rappers who once shouted out Fig in their verses fell quiet. Some scrubbed old posts, others doubled down. But behind the scenes, everyone took note. The game just changed. If you're connected, even a little, you might be next. Because now, it's not just shooters getting hit with RICO, it's recruiters, hustlers, digital handlers. And for the first time, women running street business found themselves at the top of the paperwork. The city saw it, and the streets felt it. And for survivors, this case was more than just headlines. It was proof that silence doesn't last forever. After the raids, the fallout came quick and deep. Families shattered, reputations collapsed, and the legal system moved like it was racing to set an example. Lady Duck pled not guilty. So did P4K. But the paperwork stacked against them reads like a blueprint. 26 counts, dozens of victims, digital receipts, witness statements, photos, voice notes, Cash App logs, the kind of case where even silence becomes evidence. Defense attorneys argued entrapment, manipulation, and misinterpretation of coded language. But prosecutors weren't backing down. Meanwhile, plea deals started surfacing. 3 co-defendants already flipped. One was a former stable manager. The others were low-level handlers who gave up routes, passwords, and phone histories. In exchange, they're likely facing reduced sentences and protective custody. Their testimony, if it hits trial, could be the nail in the coffin for Lady Duck and P4K. Federal sentencing guidelines for sex trafficking of minors, 20 years minimum. RICO enhancement, life. Add kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy, and some defendants may never see the streets again. But the legal impact went further than charges. Survivors were placed into federal protection programs. A few were relocated across state lines. Others began the long, slow process of rebuilding, with trauma counseling, legal guardianship, and new names. Some spoke with victim advocates, describing nights they had to walk until 3 a.m., then sleep in closets. One said she hadn't looked in a mirror for 2 years. "I forgot who I was," she said. "I was just a dollar sign to them." On the gang side, Hoover factions splintered. The indictment caused internal beef. Some claimed the operation was never sanctioned. Others warned that the feds were still watching. In South Central, silence became a new survival skill. No one wanted to be caught speaking on Lady Duck's name, especially if they'd eaten off the same plate. The district felt the shift. Hotels once complicit started rejecting cash payments. Police presence on Fig increased. Not just patrols, but sting operations. Several motels along 81st and 85th closed down temporarily. Code enforcement hit hard, claiming building violations. But everyone knew it was about the heat. Even the money slowed. Apps like Cash App and Venmo flagged certain user patterns. Burner phone providers tightened ID requirements. Word on the street said a few buyers got knocked just for sending digital payments. The Hoover pipeline didn't just take a hit, it cracked. But the biggest consequence wasn't legal. It was psychological. For the first time, the mask dropped. People had to admit that women could be traffickers, not just victims. That gang structures could run sex rings with more order than some corporations. And that the systems built to protect the vulnerable, schools, foster homes, shelters, weren't just failing. They were feeding the cycle. Now, all eyes are on the trial dates. Federal court moves slow. But with this much evidence and this many young lives involved, the stakes are sky high. What happens next could reshape how cities treat trafficking, how law treats female-led criminal networks, and how gangs adapt in a world where every phone is a witness. Because this wasn't just a bust. It was a fracture, in loyalty, in legacy, in the way the street game sees itself. Step back from the arrests, the phones, the paperwork. And what's left is a blueprint for how systems fail before the crime even starts. Because this case, it didn't begin on Fig. It started in broken homes, group shelters, and CPS files that never got followed up. That's where the true roots of this enterprise grew. We talk about Hoover, about Lady Duck, about pimping, but none of it works without raw supply. And in Los Angeles, that supply often comes from foster care. Girls placed in group homes, bounced from one placement to the next, over-medicated, underwatched. And when they run away, nobody looks. Not really. Traffickers know that. They don't have to snatch kids anymore. They just have to wait. This case exposed that pipeline like never before. According to court records, at least 6 of the underage victims were wards of the state when they were first recruited. One girl had over 15 prior placements by the age of 16. Another had gone missing 3 separate times, and no one filed a police report until a buyer flagged her on Twitter. Lady Duck didn't create that gap. She exploited it. Social media made it easy. Girls with trauma don't always cry for help. Sometimes they post thirst traps, hoping someone cares. And traffickers slide in with validation and cash. What used to take months now happens in a weekend. But this wasn't just about girls being lured. It was about power, how it gets replicated. One survivor-turned-recruiter said she was told helping manage other girls would give her protection, that she'd never have to walk again, that she could level up. That's how cycles repeat, when survival becomes the currency of control. And the community? Too many people knew. Motel clerks, neighbors, even a school counselor allegedly reported concerns about one girl. But nothing was followed up because she was 17 and probably just acting out. We call it denial. But truth is, it's complicity. This case forces a hard question. What does protection really mean in a city like LA? Because if protection is only for people with paperwork, homes, and clout, then these girls never stood a chance. They were recruited in plain sight, walked Fig in rush hour traffic, branded with tattoos, and treated like liability instead of lives. Lady Duck became a symbol, not just of female-led criminal power, but of how deeply the line between victim and villain can blur. But the bigger failure? It ain't her alone. It's the system that let her operate, uninterrupted for years. This ain't just a gang story. It's a warning. If the next Lady Duck is already out there, if the next P4K is building followers instead of files, then cities better ask themselves, are they ready to stop it or just react when it's already too late? Because silence doesn't protect the vulnerable. It protects the enterprise. If you made it this far, then you already know. This ain't just another indictment. This is what happens when power, poverty, and silence collide. When the streets get organized and the system stays disorganized. When the people getting exploited ain't seen as daughters, sisters, or kids, but as property with a price tag. The Hoover sex trafficking case isn't a headline. It's a warning. A city like Los Angeles, with all its fame, flash, and money, still has blocks where girls disappear in daylight, where trauma gets monetized, where leadership comes dressed in hood respect but operates like corporate greed. Lady Duck wasn't an outlier. She was a mirror. She showed that the same energy men bring to dope lines, some women now bring to trafficking. She showed how easy it is to turn pain into profit when nobody's checking. And P4K? He showed that the next generation of handlers don't need corners. They need Wi-Fi, an IG page, and a few broken souls willing to believe the lies. So what now? Maybe you're a social worker watching this wondering how many of your girls are already halfway down that path. Maybe you're from the block and you've seen it but didn't speak. Or maybe you're just someone who cares about truth. Not filtered, not remixed, just real. Either way, the message stays the same. Silence breeds this. And if cities keep ignoring what's happening in motels, foster homes, and DMs, the next indictment's already writing itself. This is Street Politics Report, where we shine light on what the headlines try to bury, where real stories get told and the system gets called out. Because if we don't document it, they'll pretend it never happened. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who still thinks trafficking only happens overseas. And if you're working in the system, speak up. The streets aren't waiting. Neither are the predators. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware,